Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sirius Report. Well, Russia has stated that a single BRICS currency will happen. Paul, as always, I want to thank you for being a part of the discussion, and an interesting interview by Lavrov is laying out the groundwork for the future.
Yeah, and great as ever we get together, Ken. Yeah, this is a very interesting statement. Now, to put some sort of context in on this, at the moment in Brazil, there is a foreign ministers meeting of the BRICS nations, which is one of the kind of precursors to the BRICS summit, which will happen on the 6th and 7th of July in Brazil, because Brazil even is currently has the chairmanship of this organization. So this meeting is basically the first gathering of the ministers of foreign affairs from both BRICS member countries, but also partner countries in 2025. So it's a big deal. I know there's a lot being said that's negative about BRICS, but it's very telling that Lavrov said in an interview with a Brazilian newspaper that, it will be possible to return to discussing the issue of the creation of a single currency for BRICS once the necessary conditions are in place. Now, it's important to emphasize that a BRICS currency will happen, but only on the basis that these conditions are in place. So at the moment, this precise moment, it's a bit premature to discuss this transition to a single currency for BRICS, but the question of having what you might term a common currency or a single payment unit for BRICS will happen, but once the necessary financial and economic conditions are in place. And we'll come on to what those are because they don't get discussed often enough. They're extremely important, and it lays down the groundwork and the understanding of how this can come about. It can't come about because a group of nations go, let's make it happen, let's do it tomorrow, because it will fail. And if it fails, it'll be a major uh, cause major damage, to multipolarity, to the credibility of BRICS, to the credibility of an alternative to the dollar, which is precisely what it is. And of course, it's also worth noting, Lavrov said, and this is something we've discussed for a very long time, that BRICS member states are working to create a payment and settlement infrastructure for carrying out cross-border settlements among BRICS countries. And of course, part of that is increasing the share of national currencies in transactions. Now, that's always been the initial principle aim, to increase that eventually between each other to the tune of 100%. So they totally and utterly bypass utilizing the dollar. Lavrov also stressed and made the point again that de-dollarization is one of the defining global economic trends, which, of course, as we know, is attributable to this ongoing lack of trust towards the US dollar, the US Treasury, dollar complex, and, as Lavrov said, Western led international financial institutions. So, this is what the reality has been and always will be. How it works, there is no time frame on when this will be implemented, but what it is saying is this is going to happen. But first, we have to get our ducks lined up, and we'll talk about the kind of things in a minute that all the nations in BRICS, including member states and those with aspirations to be member states, will need to take on board to make a single currency work. And these are not insurmountable, the exact opposite, but you have to implement them in a very methodical way. They have to be implemented, take into consideration all these factors that I'll come on to shortly.
In a perfect world, a singular currency amongst members of a group like BRICS wouldn't really be necessary, except for the fact that the U.S., leveraging on its Bretton Woods power and hegemony, is continuing to try to keep that as the unipolar system as the dominant one in the world. And even outside of the bilateral trade that's taking place, the multiple different agencies like the SCO, the ASEAN, the BRICS, the EEU, etc. It is Russia, China, and many of the BRICS nations that are starting to expand into places that the U.S. had previous dominion over, whether it was Africa, Europe as well, whether it was Africa, Iran, etc. And I think this is the hardest fact that the U.S. has to get into their minds because they're attacking BRICS and the BRICS nations as if they are adversaries rather than recognizing that this is a better way to conduct multilateral trade across the globe to help as many people as possible rather than to keep your power solidified into one central area.
Yeah, absolutely. But the US wants to dominate the world. It still wants to. It's still, or at least pretend to, and that's the Trump policy. It's like they make certain noises, but it's still all about having the world reserve currency, meaning the dollar. And of course, this is not going to happen. So, what are the big advantages of having a BRICS single currency? Ironically, of course, it would improve economic stability between the countries because it would mitigate, you get fluctuations in exchange rates. And therefore, it creates a far better business climate for all countries. Because if you have volatility in exchange rates, that's going to impact trade and correspondingly investment. So a unified currency or single currency would help to eradicate those problems. And of course, you'd have far more seamless and effective cross-border transactions. So in that sense, it's win-win for BRICS countries. The other thing is if you have this increased stability in this bloc, it's going to attract foreign investment because countries will then see the region as being far more predictable in a positive way. You also would have coherent monetary policy. So therefore, BRICS countries have this huge incentive to have far more economic stability, which is far more difficult to do on an individual basis or bilaterally or multilaterally as things stand. So the other big point with this, or another big point, it would massively decrease transaction costs and it would enhance the efficiency because it eliminates this currency conversion problem. So faster, more cost effective, who doesn't want that? So the big bonus of massively decreasing transaction costs, yes, it's going to benefit big corporations, but it's going to benefit, excuse me, small, medium enterprise companies far more, who obviously bear the brunt of obviously currency conversion issues far more. So if you can reduce transaction costs, clearly that improves price transparency. It makes trade more efficient and it's going to massively increase economic activity. And the big important thing is integration amongst all the BRICS countries. So, it's win-win. It helps growth, it helps investment, it helps innovation. It's also going to enhance political integration and cooperation to do with monetary and fiscal policies. So therefore, you can have far greater increase in terms of stability. That would be on an individual nation basis, but collectively as well. So they could establish a far more influential and alliance as part of the multipolar world, but globally it would become something that would massively enhance its credibility, and you would start to get more and more nations wanting to line up and join the BRICS alliance, which is growing hugely anyway. So I think the other thing that's worth mentioning, of course, is that you have to discuss the risks. So what I'll do first, Ken, is give way to you, and then I'll discuss the risks. And these risks have to be mitigated, and it's why you don't just blunder into something like this, go, let's do something and it all sounds great, then it fails. So the risks have to be assessed and mitigated, of course.
Yeah, and I may have a sort of precursor heading into what you see as the risks here. We're already seeing emerging in the BRICS nations trade amongst them. Russia is selling a lot of oil energy to India, and they're accumulating tons and tons and tons of rupees. Well, they don't trade as much directly with India for India's goods, so they've been sitting here with a bunch of rupees that they really have no real way of spending. Meanwhile, China, and we talked about this, I think, last week in a podcast, China is looking to start internationalizing the yuan in a much greater capacity. So economies and nations like India or anybody who joins the BRICS or the SCO is going to be slightly fearful that China, as it expands and grows faster, is going to just be replacing the U.S. with China as another dominating economy over the system. By having a singular currency for Russia, they can go ahead and say, we don't want, hold all these rupees. We will trade them for whatever BRICS currency and be able to spend it in China, in South Africa, in Brazil. Meanwhile, if India can feel comfortable with trading in a singular currency, then they don't have to worry about the yuan dominating the BRICS nations and the BRICS coalition.
Yeah, it's an extremely important point, because, and this ties in with obviously they are economically, financially divergent countries because China's the biggest economy in the world. It's got a huge emphasis on, well, industrialization, new technology internally, more of a consumption market, also continue with its export-based market. India's economy is more reliant on domestic consumption. And then, as you say, you've got Russia, which is a huge exporter of commodities. And they're just three nations. And we have to deal with the fact they all have very different fiscal and monetary policy to deal with, different interest rates, different capabilities in terms of budgetary constraints or lack of them, and different economic policies. And if you don't have a mechanism to deal with what Lavrov rightly talks about, the economic financial considerations, the risk is you're actually going to weaken the countries, and a single currency then could create even more economic imbalances. And as you say, the risk is certain nations would become stronger, potentially at the expense of the others. And the whole point about the multipolar world is to avoid that at all costs. So, of course, there's also, you've got to deal with the issue of governance and the political implications of this. So, how can you make decisions collectively? If you've got 30, 40 nations, how's that going to work? How do you deal with conflict resolution if there are issues that need to be dealt with? So, this potentially could impact the long-term viability, stability, and success of a unified currency. So they're not impossible to deal with. They're actually not difficult, provided you have the buying and cooperation amongst countries. And that's going to be hugely important. And then, you have to have some sort of harmonization of financial systems. Is there going to be, therefore, a BRICS central bank in inverted commas? And then how do you harmonize monetary policy? So that's going to need a huge amount of cooperation and coordination. And then at the end of the day, if you're going to have a new currency system, what does this mean? Is this actually going to be a BRICS currency that BRICS nations? So could you and I have access to BRICS currency, or is it going to be just for international or trade between the BRICS countries, or maybe countries that aren't in BRIC who will accept the BRICS currency because they can go and spend it buying goods and services from other countries? You're going to have to hugely enhance the financial infrastructure to deal with this. They're not difficult problems. Financial infrastructure in today is child's play compared to what it used to be. And then having reached an agreement and how you're going to roll it out, you can't just go one day, right, today we're going to roll out the BRICS unified currency or single currency. It's not going to work. So you'd have to have some sort of phased in approach, some sort of integration. And that would first have to deal with monetary policy and how do you deal with exchange rate, issues, and how you're going to have financial regulation. And you're going to therefore have to have quite an adapt process that's people can be flexible about, but also they're going to have to deal with some quite rigid rules, and then you're going to have some sort of issue of how do you deal with the institutional frameworks that need to be put in place and financial oversight, regulation, because you're going to have some of that, otherwise it will fail. And then you need to be absolutely on top of dealing with risk management issues, because risk mitigation is probably the most important thing. And so what happens if in individual nations there are problems? How does the BRICS currency handle that, or the institutions? What is the impact on BRICS as a whole? And so even geopolitical considerations you would have to think about. So you would need cooperation within BRICS and how that would operate, as I've just said, but then you need cooperation with other institutions globally. So for argument's sake, how does the BRICS currency work with the euro? I'm not sure you'd want to talk about it working with the dollar or the European Union, because I don't think the dollar is going to be, or the US is going to be particularly interested in dealing with the BRICS currency on principle. But the point is, how does that international cooperation work? How do all these financial institutions work with one another? I mean, does it work or is it never going to work? We don't know. But these are all the kind of questions that all previous discussions about this completely, well, not totally all of them, but most of the discussions that were in alt media was all about there's going to be a BRICS currency. It's going to be announced at the next summit. We said, no, it's not. It's absolutely nowhere near the point of doing this, but they are talking about these things. There's a lot of meetings always going on about how they can make this work and integrate it, but you have to have it in this incremental approach. There has to be various steps. They're taking the steps first to de-dollarize, to use local currencies, to begin to formulate an idea of these are the first steps and we're implementing them. The next step will be how does this unified currency work?
Yeah, and absolutely. In the eventually it's got to get to the point of where you have development, because I know the BRICS, the SCO, the ASEAN, they're not just simply about trade. They're also about development. We see this, what China has done in Africa. We see what's happening, especially in Iran, Saudi Arabia. Iran is a big key that is going to be part of the BRICS alliance as well. Hasn't really been spoken as much, but you're going to have to be able to integrate into West Asia, Africa, and the like. So you're going to also, that's going to be a significant point on development. The BRICS, singular BRICS currency then is going to morph into, maybe be an umbrella of sorts that could lead something. And I'm just throwing this out there as a similar but flawed thing, an SDR that the IMF has, where it's a recognized form of currency or debt that can be used and interchanged with whatever other currencies to be able to do development, et cetera. So there's a lot of things on the table, and the singular BRICS currency is not the first step. Bilateral and multilateral trade has been the first step amongst these organizations, but it's certainly the next step to try to bring about the multipolar world.
Yeah,
Paul, any other?
the important point just finally, Ken, is this is going to happen. It's just a question of when, not if, but don't, excuse me, jump the gun with people making all manner of statements. It's going to happen now. It'll happen when it's going to happen. It will happen so it works efficiently. because if it fails, you only get one chance. And when it's dead and buried, it's gone forever. And it's one of those situations. If that happens, it will cause immense damage to the whole idea of how an alternative financial system will work. So you have to get it right and you have to implement it at the right time. So, as ever, as I say, be informed, not entertained.
And as you've pointed out many times as well, uh, things like this are event driven, not time driven.
Yes,
Paul, as
absolutely.
always, I want to thank you for being a part of the discussion and for bringing your insight in something of vast importance.
Yes, likewise.
And to everybody here at the Sirius Report community, thank you as always for your support. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, comment, send this out to anybody you think it might be important to. And until the next time we get together, have a great day.